trillion infrastructure bill. And of course, the days of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies involvement with that. We're here to talk about actual infrastructure in the industry. So not an infrastructure bill that had crypto thrown in, actual infrastructure in crypto, the ever dynamic mining industry in crypto. Following China's crackdown, we see the global hash rate that's largely shifted to North America. The US is now key mining hub, and institutions in America are taking center stage. There's a new demographic of miners with special requirements and new increased sophistication here in America, and we're going to get to all of that. We've got Mike Collier with us here today to talk about the paradigm shift in mining and the future that the industry has. Thank you.
Nolan, thank you for the invite. I'm excited to talk to you about the crazy mining space.
Yeah, well, let's start with where you got going with Foundry, because I find that those whole circumstances to be amazing. When I first heard that you were launching Foundry in late 2019, and then of course with everything that happened in the first months of 2020, there was a ton of headwinds your way, right? If I recall the context in which you guys launched, you had the hash rate sinking in March of 2020. You had some capitulation of small-time miners. We saw a bit of a condensing of only a few players in China that were responsible for almost half the hash rate for a little while, 5 or 6 participants really. And from there, you had all of these headwinds against the industry, and here we are, not 18 months later, completely different industry and almost a completely different company. So welcome. Tell me how you survived those few months and how you've grown this far.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's important to note that, Foundry is a wholly owned subsidiary of DCG, and Foundry was started by Barry Silbert. So he, obviously has been in the industry for a long, long time. He had avoided the mining space for many years, but he saw that institutional money was going to come into the space, and he felt like institutional money was going to come into the Bitcoin mining space. And as DCG kind of dipped their toe into mining, they realized it was still the wild, wild west, I guess is maybe the best way to describe it. It's a really tough market to navigate. And that's where Barry said, hey, we've got to deploy some resources here and help kind of bring the professionalism of the industry to the next level. And how do we help do that? And that's when he'd reached out to me and asked me to come on board to lead the efforts. And you're right, it's been a wild ride. It's the space moves very, very quickly. I've had the privilege to be in the mining space now for 4 years, and so
tell me a bit about why Barry reached out to you in the first place to lead these efforts.
Yeah, so I most of my career, 20 plus years, I was the last half of it was I was a hired gun for private equity to run companies, to fix companies, and I discovered Bitcoin and blockchain technology in the summer of 2017, so right before the big bull run. And it reminded me of the start of the internet. And I was in college when Mosaic and Netscape came out, and I just, as the more I learned about it, the more I realized that this doesn't happen very often in a lifetime, where there's technology that fundamentally changes how we connect and work with each other as a human race. And I said, what the heck, I'm going to go all in. So I decided to pivot my entire career and basically learn this industry. And I fell in love with the mining piece of it. It made sense to me. I was like, you know what, we're going to have to build out the infrastructure first. Everything else felt too early in terms of like layer 2 applications and such. And I just got it. It was just like, oh, okay, you got to have cheap power, and you got to be able to plug these machines in, and it's got to be cold. And I live in upstate New York, and I was like, hey, this is perfect. So I ran a small mining firm in upstate New York, where at the time we had like tripled the size of it. We went from like 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts, and which was like enormous. And I knew the guys that started Core Scientific, and they talked me into to joining them. And while I was there, that business grew from like 25 megawatts to 100 megawatts. And I had a chance over those years to kind of meet a lot of the people in the industry. I got to know a lot of folks in China with the manufacturers, and then Barry reached out and said, "Hey, I'd love for you to lead up what we want to do here at DCG with Foundry." So I came in, and he basically gave me a white sheet of paper, and he's like, "Figure out where we can add value. How do we
Directionally,
leverage?"
it was to that institutional side, right?
In the beginning, it wasn't even. It was just literally a white sheet of paper. He said, "Figure out where we can leverage the DCG balance sheet, the brand, the subsidiary companies, the portfolio companies." And I think just the fact that DCG was going to get into the mining space sent a big signal. And at the time, we looked at it and said, "Look at all these miners. They'd been building all through crypto winter, right? So we were still in crypto winter from a mining perspective, even from a price perspective. And what we found was that most miners were cash poor. So we said, let's launch our equipment financing business." And you're right. And when we got it off the ground in kind of the February, March timeframe, like that was at the low end of the Bitcoin price. The markets crashed. We were 60 days away from halving, and we were literally wiring tens of millions of dollars to China to buy equipment. And we took a big bet on the new equipment that was going to come, and it's just been a wild ride ever since. And the market today is very different than what it was 12 months ago. 12 months ago, people were scared about mining. They weren't sure what the future was going to look like. Was the Bitcoin price ever going to rebound? What was going to happen post-halving? There's a lot
Let's
of...
pick up a bit on the adaptation, though, from those crackdowns in China and the actual hardware piece. So you just mentioned when you came in, we're at the bottom, probably a lot of surplus of machines out there, sort of a lot of availability. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe there weren't a lot, and now we're seeing other things. I see that in cars, for example, we've got the microchip shortage. What's going on in the physical space, and how did the China situation change that? Oversupply of machines now, undersupply. What's financing like? What's going on?
Yeah, so this market moves so quickly. If you go back 12 months, so the July, August timeframe last year, it was very difficult to get your hands on equipment. You were talking about, a 4 to 6 month lead time. And what we didn't appreciate at that point in time was the fact that there was truly a shortage of wafers available for Bitmain and MicroBT, and they were limited in their new production of equipment. And we're really only focused on the new stuff. The old equipment it was reaching its end of life, and it's really all about the new generation equipment. And then what's happened, and then there was lots of space, so there's lots of places to plug miners in. So the hardest thing was getting your hands on machines. And then you had the publicly traded companies were then able to raise money, and they were able to go place large orders. So all of a sudden you had a lot of the big publicly traded companies buying up lots of equipment, and it was hard to get your hands on any equipment. And that stayed true all the way through probably kind of the May timeframe, May, June of this year. It was, people were placing orders in May. You're not getting equipment until January of 2022. And then what happened, the rumor started going around in May, and then in June, all of a sudden it was like, hey, China is really going to shut down mining. And it was like, okay, yeah, they always say that. And then they really did it. And, we saw 40% of the hash rate just overnight come off the network, which is just kind of mind blowing. I mean, we set out, one of our original missions was, we want to kill the narrative that China controls Bitcoin through the mining space. And we wanted to get as much hash rate out of China into North America, into the rest of the world, just to kill that narrative. Because we know it's not true, like, but that's one of the things that was preventing people from investing in Bitcoin was this idea that, oh, we hear China has all the mining hash power. And so we were really working hard to kind of kill that narrative. And we had done I think as an industry, we had done a pretty good job of moving that narrative. And then boom, overnight, China shuts down mining. And it was like, wow. But the most important the most important part of that whole thing was what happened to Bitcoin? Nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Every 10
Shrugged it
minutes,
off.
every 10 minutes, a block is produced and it just keeps on moving. So right now, what's happening is, you've got probably 2 gigawatts worth of machines looking for a new home. And the Chinese miners are scavenging the whole world looking for a place to plug in their machines. North America will be a big landing spot for it. But the tough part right now is everybody's full, right? So everybody's been building out like crazy, but they've been building out for orders that were placed 6 months ago. And, there's not a lot of capacity in really any place in the world to plug machines in.
So I want to talk a bit more about capacity, but first let's go back to the hardware dynamics, just because when I see all of this, supply shock, let's say with the wafers, now an overabundance of the, current generation of machines looking for capacity around the world. Does this do anything to long-term prospects about the generational leap in the physical machines? What I mean is, every time there is, like in video games or your iPhone, right, you get the new one and it sort of creates a whole new dynamic. Does that change the pace of what's going on in the industry? Do you now have, with your current machines, a longer, let's imagine, I'm guessing, a longer shelf life or a longer competitive lifespan for these machines now?
Absolutely. So a bunch of things have happened over the last few years. An S9 today, it's 5 years old. It's still profitable. If you have an S9 plugged in, it's still making money. I lost a steak dinner with a good friend of mine because I bet him that, by the end of 2020, the S9s would be dead. And they're still going. And it just blows my mind that's still the case. I do think they are reaching end of life here in the next kind of 6 months. But what we've seen over the last few years is, when the ASICs were first introduced, they were introduced on like older chip technology, right? And Bitmain and MicroBT have been able to rapidly come down the technology curve so that they're now using the most advanced chips to build Bitcoin mining equipment. And what we've seen this time around was the fact that now they're competing with Apple and Samsung for the best chips. And they just aren't getting the allocation they used to be able to get with, older design chips. So I think what does that mean? I think that means that these machines are going to last longer and be
are they going to be able to get more
time.
accumulation, more of a allocation by spending more money? Because I remember when you jumped in this in 2017, if you remember, there were people flying over to fill up their bags in Hong Kong and flying back. They were able to pay more than Sony on a smaller scale, than some of the big companies. But is that going to repeat itself at the larger scale where it's just a matter of them looking at the mining industry first because they want to be the most competitive before video games?
What we hear is TSMC and Samsung, the 2 big chip manufacturers, are much more cautious about this industry because they got burnt bad in the last bull run. Mm-hmm. But they understand that it's an important part of the future, so they are allocating space to the Bitmains and the MicroBTs and I think we're going to see other chip manufacturers, use this as an opportunity to kind of grow their business too. SMIC in China, they're developing, they've got allocations for Bitcoin miners. And I think other people will start to come onto the scene here, hopefully.
Plus, we're hearing a lot about North America's own capacity with chip production and how it needs to increase. And of course, there could even be dedicated chip producers in America for the mining industry. It's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting is, with Bitcoin mining, it's probably the fastest way to find out if your chip works or not. So it's almost like it can be part of your R&D process. And I think people are they're gonna start to utilize that over time.
I guess there's a certain stress test that comes with ASIC mining that would let you know on
Absolutely.
a batch wise. It's like
Absolutely.
it's like what Intel did to perfect its technology with the original silicon chips, of course, was the Apollo missions, right? They put those into the original space shuttles and launched them, and they could tell right away if they were burnt because there was critical machines that didn't work.
Right.
So let's go back to capacity now. In my mind, I do just imagine these entire large cargo ships looking for ports in the world and power stations and, filled with Bitcoin miners looking to find a place to go and waiting to be told that they can go to this place and that place and plug in. Is that really the scene? Do we just have, is it tens of thousands? Is it hundreds of thousands of machines? What's the capacity, limit right now?
Well, I mean, there's probably 200,000 to 300,000 new generation machines coming out of China looking for a home. There's hundreds of thousands of older generation machines looking for a home as well, but I honestly don't think most of them are not going to get plugged in. So it's kind of like end of life for those guys. But yeah, I mean, right now it is where can these machines go and find a place to get turned on? And it's a 6 to 9 month waiting period, just to build out the infrastructure. I mean, it's a lot. People, we see these pitches all the time of, oh, we're gonna build a 100-megawatt facility. It's like, that's a big deal. Like, that's a big project, building out a 100-megawatt facility. It takes months to do that, not weeks. So I think the timeline is going to be a lot longer than people anticipate.
So El Salvador got an awful lot of attention with the volcano mining. As a, of course, it was pictures and visual and easy to imagine. But the country did promote itself in such a way that I'm sure people picked up the phone and said, could I put capacity over there? Are there any countries standing out besides America for capacity? Of course, America looks like it could take on a lot of this capacity, but who else is standing out right now globally? Where are people looking and they're finding a place to plug in machines? Or is it really just so full right now that there isn't a taker?
Yeah, so, we do a lot of work in the US, we do a lot of work in Canada. I think those two have the biggest and some of the most mature markets for, building out large scale facilities. We got a business now set up in Iceland, in Norway, and Sweden for the Nordic countries. So we think there's growth opportunity there. Limited just because of the size, but the Kazakhstan has been a hotbed. I think Russia is going to continue to grow as an option. I think there's going to be South American countries that are definitely going to be growing with the hydropower that they have and the excess. What we're seeing is more, when we think about how this thing's going to evolve, more and more energy companies are starting to wake up to the fact that Bitcoin mining can be part of their critical infrastructure as they build out renewable projects. So as wind projects get built, solar projects get built, nuclear projects get built, I think you're going to see co-location of Bitcoin mining with those new projects, and it helps the energy companies pay back those facilities faster. It gives you a large load that's intermittent, which gives them the ability to turn it on, turn it off. And I think that's going to be kind of the big focus the next 4 to 8 years.
Would an analogy be kind of like an anchor tenant for a mall? Like, if they're
Totally.
building a new
Yeah,
mall and you have a
absolutely.
Sears or whatever, and then is that what mining can be for energy projects?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because
And you
right
think
now,
about,
you think of an anchor tenant. It's not obviously it's an analogy with tons of limitations, but a city, for example, you build a power station, a nuclear power station near where there's demand, and the demand are residences, probably some industry. In this case, could you imagine that a Bitcoin miner would, let's say, increase the freedom of where you can put some of these
oh,
stations because you have the load balancing? Could you now start putting nuclear power in places you might not have thought of it before because you have this load balancer?
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it opens up a whole nother level of energy production, right? So nobody wants a wind farm in their backyard. Nobody wants a solar facility in their backyard. Nobody wants a power plant in their backyard. So when you go locate it in a remote area, you have to build all the transmission lines back to where people actually live. And I think so we don't do that. We don't build a lot of stuff remotely. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to start building stuff more remotely, use Bitcoin mining to pay for that base infrastructure as well as the transmission lines. And then once you can connect that back to the grid, I think that Bitcoin mining facility then starts to migrate to the next project, right? And it just becomes a movable power load that
We got to
is
get
incredible.
SimCity to put a Bitcoin miner in as an upgrade for your
There you
power
go.
stations.
That's a great idea, Nolan.
Planning.
That's a great
Get it
idea.
sponsored. Get it
Yeah,
sponsored.
let's go run the simulations, right? Let's go
Yeah,
run the
yeah,
simulations, see
yeah.
how it works.
See if you get
Um,
more stations there. I saw in the height of the Tesla, oh, it's not great for the environment or whatever he said. I saw Rolls-Royce, another great engine maker, great engineers, announce that they have built a Gen 4 nuclear reactor that will be built in factory and delivered to people, and they're looking for buyers. Right? It's not even $1 billion or $2 billion. It was not an exorbitant. I was surprised about the price. Can we see a day where that's going right now it's nation states, let's say, that are buying nuclear reactors? There aren't a lot of private companies standing up that can get through all of the hurdles and everything. But can you imagine a day when a private industry funded by a Bitcoin project is buying its own nuclear reactor and running it as it sees fit, maybe selling the energy to big city down the power line?
no, Nolan. Most of my life, only nation states went to space, and now we have private individuals building rocket ships to go to space. It blows my mind. And you're right. In the past, it was nation states that built out the energy grid that could only invest in things like nuclear. It, when I was growing up, nuclear was like it was Chernobyl, right? Like that's all anybody ever talked about. 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, and the nuclear industry has come a long, long ways, and I don't think we're that far from the point where we're gonna realize that hey, coal is not sustainable for burning for energy production, and we got to move to something else. And it can't just be wind and solar. You need like a good base load to keep the grid stable. And nuclear is the most obvious answer. And I think it's gonna happen faster than what we can imagine, right? Like 10 years from now, we may have nuclear plants all over the place, and it probably won't be the government driving that.
Yeah, well, when I look at California's current troubles, there's a solution that looks obvious, and it's a lot of desalination powered by nuclear energy along that coast. And we're yet to see anyone. I think you could be governor of California in 10 seconds if you propose that. But it might not be governments that do it because it gets complicated. It might have to be private industry. It might have to be you. You might have to go finance a nuclear power station in California somewhere and mine the heck out of it.
I don't know if California would be my first place I'd go, but
Yeah.
but yeah, maybe someday. Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit more about the environment piece, because we've only talked about the positive aspects and that there are a lot of solutions out there. But just like with China, there's of course a lot of psychological persuasion that's negative towards cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, because of the mining aspect. Now I don't think this argument will ever be won by saying, oh, well, if you actually look at the facts and the numbers, we use this much less than people said, and the calculations are wrong about transactions and output and all that, because people, they kind of get lost by the science of it all. Right now, people just see the reality. There's a ton of energy being used, and then it's sort of singled out in that people doubt its utility and why we're spending this money on it and all that. What do you see miners doing in order to play the persuasion game? Not the arguing, not the facts and the figures, the persuasion game to help people see beyond the, the negative parts and to see the positive implications. A lot of the stuff which you just described, right? The positive implications of power generation. Where do we see the energy? Where do we see the mining industry getting into the persuasion game?
Yeah, there's definitely a group of people that just don't believe in Bitcoin, and it's their easiest argument to go chase, and you'll never convince them. The thing that I love, that I every day become more and more appreciative of, is the brilliance of the Bitcoin white paper. So the technology that we're working off of, the Bitcoin algorithm is ruthless in its drive for the lowest cost. It doesn't need anybody to tell you to go get the lowest cost. You have to go get the lowest cost if you're going to survive. So miners are naturally incentivized to go chase the lowest cost energy, because that's your biggest cost variable. And the lowest cost energy is renewable energy. Today it's probably hydro is probably the lowest cost energy source. And that's why Bitcoin miners tend to gravitate towards the areas where there's
Which
hydro.
Is what you're using mostly in northern New York and Quebec.
Yeah, well, and even down through like Core Scientific with TVA, down through the Tennessee Valley Authority. Like there's lots of hydro throughout North America. And then why are people going to West Texas? Because there's enormous amounts of wind energy that was built. They got surplus energy to the grid now, and they need off-takers. They need people to use this energy. So Bitcoin miners are naturally incentivized to go find the renewable sources. And I actually think Bitcoin mining is going to be a bridge to a future of renewable energy, right? So it's actually, if you really peel it back and you really study it and you understand it, if you believe in renewable energy and that is our future, you would be promoting Bitcoin mining, not being a naysayer against it. So battery technology is not there yet, and Bitcoin mining is going to be that battery that's going to help transition us over the next 10 years. So I'm super excited about it. Like
what I'm hearing, just to repeat it back so we make sure that we're following, is that the incentive structures from the white paper, the incentive structures that have made Bitcoin grow like an organism and get bigger and stronger, are at the same time naturally solving its energy consumption problem and are naturally driving towards cheaper costs and therefore cleaner energy that doesn't have to go through the whole fossil fuel rigmarole.
Absolutely. Even with the latest
the IPCC report.
No, well, you get the IPCC, they're gonna always claim the world is,
sure,
everyone's boiling the ocean.
But in their own paper say that you might not notice because they talk about it's like 6% of GDP or something. Okay, well, yeah, I don't know if I would notice. 6%.
No, what I was going to say was even the equipment, the new generation machines are over 100% more efficient than the last generation machines. So we're getting a lot more security from that equipment using less energy. And people don't factor that in. They think that it's just like this exponential growth, and it's not. It's not. We're getting a lot more security for a lot less energy usage.
I want to. We were discussing the machines, and you brought up the efficiencies of them right now. And I want to turn quickly. I would been scanning some of the listeners' questions, and one person did have a good one related to this, and I wanted to bring it up with you, which is, do you expect some of these efficiencies or these leading physical manufacturers of the mining rigs to be more diversified than just the 2 or 3 Chinese companies that make the best ones in the world today. Do you imagine that could have an American competitor, or is that industry so far ahead? Or, as you mentioned earlier, can R&D be done and a new entrant come in a short amount of time?
Absolutely. I think there's lots of teams around the world working on this. My belief is that the next big transformation on the infrastructure side is going to be around immersion mining. I think we've reached the limits of how hot we can get these machines to run effectively through air cooling. And we're going to have some sort of immersion solution. And I think the companies that figure that out first will have the edge in the next, cycle.
Just so listeners are aware, there's a certain category of miners already that aren't running with fans. They're submerged into a type of oil mixture.
It's a fluid, yeah. It's a fluid. It's not water. It's a fluid, non-dielectric,
but not conductive, right?
It's not conductive, and so most of it is taking existing machines and modifying them, and then immersing them in this fluid. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to run them and get more hash power out. And it's a more efficient way of keeping the machines cool. And I just think that that's kind of where we go next. And by the way, once we do that opens up all kinds of environments where it's really hard to get Bitcoin mining to be successful today, where you can then put containers of machines that are in immersion solutions out in the desert with a big solar farm. Right? Today it's kind of hard to do that because it gets hot.
For a guy who came from equity markets and corporate takeovers and whatnot, you sure have learned a lot about a very specialized industry. But there are some other unintended consequences from the China change that I think fell right into your talent stack or your skill set, and that has to do a little bit with the mining pools. So it wasn't just hash rate and it wasn't just the physical infrastructure. China has almost opened the door to a whole new competitor in another segment of mining pools, which they dominated, right? But you guys have definitely made some inroads there. Can you describe a bit about that and how this business is operating and what exactly happened with the Chinese situation and whether or not that really is the advantage that I believe it is for you guys?
Yeah, so I actually think they're a little bit separate. So China had a monopoly around the pool software layer, right? So if you were a miner in North America, you really had no choice but to hook up to a Chinese pool for the most part. Slush pool's always been out there. They were the first, big pool. But it's the Chinese pool is guaranteed payouts to the miners, right? So this FPPS payout where, when you're mining a block, there's a bit of luck involved, which is another beautiful thing about the Satoshi Whitepaper is the fact that you can't game the system, right? It's literally it's a lottery, and which is
you can control how many tickets you have is how I describe it to people. That's the best you can do. You can't control if you win, but you can get more tickets in the time you have to get tickets.
Yes, and then it will get more difficult if you get
too many
more
tickets
than everybody else. So we looked at it and said, hey, these large publicly traded miners need a trusted pool operator. They need transparency, they need security, reliability, and we decided to build that pool layer software to support the North American miners. And it's a tough business. The Chinese, there's been a lot of competition in the Chinese market. So even though we call it a monopoly, they've really driven their fees down to close to zero. So we had to match that. Plus we had to guarantee all the payouts for the miners. And you have to have really deep pockets to pull this off. I mean, it's cost us a lot of money to be able to provide this service to the North American miners. And I think it's a really important component of the overall network. I mean, we're really strengthening the network by having a viable solution to just all the Chinese pools that are out there.
So who's been participating in these pools besides the miners?
So we KYC everybody into our pool. We've really targeted the institutional size miners and the publicly traded miners. You know, they're auditors, they're accountants. When you go to close your books and you get to the point where you're like, okay, prove to me that the hash rate you gave to the pool, you're getting the right return for that. It's a black box. It's like a dead end. So we've really built the tools to provide all the transparency so that the North American, you know, accounting firms and auditors feel very comfortable that the miners are getting what
they can verify too.
They can verify it, and they can independently verify it. So we, you know, most of the publicly traded miners are now mining in our pool, and I think it's been a great service. And part of this is, you know, we've got a very close connection to our sister company Genesis, where we want to help miners with their treasury management services. So I always say miners are really good at making Bitcoin, but then they don't know what to do with the Bitcoin, right? And there's now lots of things you can do with Bitcoin, whether you take loans out against it, whether you lend it, you can do derivatives, you can, you know, just sell it spot if you want. There's a lot of stuff that can be done, and you can make more money if you have a good partner.
When the Chinese miner Bitmain and the founder Jihan Wu created the Matrix port out in Singapore, I had a feeling that they were creating a trend, or at least closing a loop on a place where they would have been losing a lot of extra revenue had they been able to manage treasury a lot better, right?
Yeah.
Is that going to be something you're going to see spread throughout the industry more?
Oh,
or are you
totally.
Going to see...
We're driving it. I mean, we're pushing it very hard with our customer base through the mining pool. We're really trying to help miners, you know, be more profitable and, you know, be better stewards of the Bitcoin that they're mining. You know, it's been, you know, Nolan, it's been a fascinating ride the last year. We've built an amazing team in Rochester. I mean, you know, a year and a half ago, it was like me and Andrea, and then it was me, Andrea, and a couple interns, and we're approaching 50 people. And right now, I mean, you know, if we could find all the right people, we would double again in the next.
You guys are out there looking in the market?
We are absolutely looking for folks that have a real passion for the industry, that want to join a great team and want to change the world.
How can they find you?
So you can go to our website, foundrydigital.com. You can find us on Twitter at Foundry Services. You know, the other half of our business is really proof of stake. And I know this is all about the proof of work side, but we stake on 20 some different protocols now. And it's been, it's that part of the world is just incredible. So I'm excited because it's, you know, you hear all the negative, even this week in Washington, all the negative around the infrastructure bill and this crypto and all that. And I sleep well at night knowing that we're building out the future financial world. And there is a better solution out there. We're not
certainly
stuck.
And I think listening to their technical control and mastery of the subjects was, you know, if nothing more than a wake-up pill for lots of folks in the industry. Not necessarily to wait for them to come up with the right answers, but to keep building and keep doing what you're doing, because it's important work. Now, along those lines, you know, what are the major changes and, let's say, forces that you see at play from here until Christmas time? Let's say, what environment are the miners going to be living in for the next 5 or 6 months?
So I think there's kind of two realities. There's the reality of those that have machines plugged in. I think the economics are going to be fantastic. For those that are looking for places to plug machines in, I think you want to strike deals as fast as you can, because it's only going to get more and more challenging over the next few months. I think hash rate's going to continue to increase. I mean, it bottomed out here, a month ago, and I think there's no place but up for hash rate for the next, 3-4 years. For sure. I mean,
and does America continue to play this major role in absorbing the Chinese change? Is it, or, I have a few questions coming in from listeners. Really, I know we talked a bit about targeting other parts of the world, but specifically, once again, Latin America, is this a part of the world where, just due to the proximity and that you can ship a lot of this stuff easily, going to have a chance to take some of this capacity, or at least add new capacity?
Yeah. So look at I don't think it was not great for Bitcoin to have China be a dominant player in the mining space. They had 70+% of the hash rate for a long time. And I don't think it's good for Bitcoin for North America to end up with 60-70% of the hash rate. That it defeats the whole purpose of a decentralized network. So we're absolutely looking at other places in the world and trying to figure out what we can do to help different regions. And I do think, nation states are going to have a strategy around Bitcoin mining. As crazy as that sounds, I mean, I hear myself saying it. Mm-hmm. I think that's going to be the reality in the next cycle. Just like they have a strategy around oil and gas and gold and other commodities, they're going to need a strategy around Bitcoin mining.
Would you imagine one of these working? I've thought the same. Would it look like this? When the Keystone pipeline between America and Alberta and Canada was canceled, half of me said, well, maybe Alberta just doesn't ship it anywhere. Maybe they convert it into Bitcoin.
Absolutely.
Maybe you don't need a pipeline. Could you see, Bitcoin and that used to be used in a type of messaging situation? Because of course that pipeline cancellation, sent spin doctors into a tizzy in Canada and the Biden administration, and everybody had to come up with talking points around it. One can imagine in the future, in the next couple of years, a company coming in saying, I'm going to make your problems go away, right?
I think it changes the power structure throughout the world over time. We're already seeing it. Think of just this week. Like 4 years ago, the thought that Congress was going to be debating a bill around crypto, give me a break. And it was happening this week. And by the way, we didn't win, except a whole bunch of senators now realize we have a big voice, and we have a lot of money, and wow, we better pay attention to these guys. Yeah, and that changes the dynamics completely going forward.
Yeah. That was definitely a clear voice.
And I think the same thing's true on the energy side. Those companies that are sitting, or those countries that sit on lots of oil over the last 100 years have had a lot of power. And I think the game's changing.
Well, for proof of your prediction, we needn't look no further than the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the largest in the world, which announced, I guess it was already way back last December, that one of the companies they deal with heavily will be trying to even do it as a matter of policy eventually. I imagine if you're the Sovereign Wealth Fund and getting involved in energy projects in Norway, there's some amount of policy that has to be coordinated. So we should see it soon.
This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And we even saw it here in the United States of like New York threatening to put a moratorium on mining, and literally the Texas governor tweeting out, miners are welcome in Texas. It blows my mind that the governor of Texas knows what Bitcoin mining is and is saying, come here.
And a good proof of the American federal model being competitive, especially in mining. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Absolutely. It's exciting times.
It sure is. Well, that brings us up to the end of our webinar. Mike, it's been great chatting with you, great catching up. Thanks everyone in the audience for joining us today. I hope you learned a lot. I did. Mining to me remains one of the easiest parts of the industry to picture, to visualize, to understand. and really does give a lot of context. So thanks, Mike, for bringing context for everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Nolan. Appreciate it.
Tune in next time for another webinar with CoinDesk. Thanks for your time.